Hello, and welcome to the Fear Channel, a channel with regular broadcasts telling the most chilling of urban legends, ghost stories, and forays into the darkest corners of the human mind. Those faint of heart or prone to night terror should proceed at their own risk. Tonight's story is Australian shadow people, the Maiyal Mula. Back in 2005, my family moved to a house in southern Australia. Pretty much every single person living on our street had only lived there for under 5 years, apart from an elderly couple who lived at the far end. This elderly couple lived there for 40 years and raised their children on the street. They said strange things happened there, and most people can't handle it, so they end up leaving. They never really went into what scared the people off, just saying the whole street was haunted. But they did say it only started happening in the early 90s. The first experience I had was a week after moving in. I heard a low-pitched humming sound coming from outside my bedroom window. When I looked out, I saw this tall black figure with long arms and long fingers, with no facial features. He was slightly transparent and had backed up against the wall inside the garage. Due to its height, it had to hunch over. I was staring out for around 5 seconds before it realized I was looking at it. It turned its head toward me, and I quickly moved away from the window to run and tell my parents. My dad went out and saw nothing was there. I sketched what I saw. Shortly thereafter, I started hanging out with the neighborhood kids. We were all teenagers, and they told me their stories. All of them described the same figures I had seen. One of the kids was Aboriginal, and we would go visit his grandfather a lot. He called the entities Maiyal Mula, which translated roughly to stranger man. He said that the Aboriginals in the area had been dealing with them long before the arrival of Europeans, and said that they weren't of the land, which kind of meant they didn't belong there and were spirits. That they would take children away and eat them. He said that the Aboriginals cast them behind the creek because according to their folklore, evil spirits can't cross running water. But since the creek partially dried up, the Maiyal Mula had once again been able to get into the town. The town that I lived in was built directly over the previous Aboriginal settlement. This tribe wasn't nomadic and had remained in a small area for over 1,000 years. One day, my friends and I were playing cricket out at the flat patch of desert in between the road and my house. The sun was setting, and as we were packing up our stuff, we noticed that there were people off in the distance approaching the road. The closer they got, the more details we could see, and we noticed that they were fully black, tall, and weren't walking, but floating. We could also hear a low-pitched humming sound that got louder the closer they got. We bolted back to my house and told my parents, but once again they didn't believe us. I hassled my father enough that he drove down on his motorbike to the area where we saw them approaching. After 9 minutes he came back to the house, visibly shaken, saying he saw them, and that I wasn't to go down there anymore. Every time I tried to get details on what happened, he would always change the subject. One night I was coming home from a party with my friends, and as we passed the empty lot in the street, we saw these 2 small figures sitting on tree stumps, just staring at us. One was bigger than the other, and once again we heard a low-pitched humming sound. One of my friends took a step towards the closer one, and when he did, it made this deep growl. I had never heard anything like it, and to make a long story short, we screamed and ran to my house. I'm mentioning this because unlike the tall figures I had seen, and I'd seen them a lot at night, these things were completely physical, not transparent. They were shaped like babies, but didn't have a neck. We didn't stick around long enough to figure out much more. But it gets worse. There used to be a group of kids that would take their dirt bikes beyond the creek and would go riding way out in the desert. One day, they didn't come home, and everyone assumed they had just gotten lost. They were found a week later, all 5 of them. They were alive, but had no more food or water out in the Australian outback, and had been there for a week. What scared me was what the younger brother of one of the bikers told me. He said that his brother and the other bikers saw a light out in the desert, and they felt compelled to follow it. He said he felt like he was in a trance, and they didn't stop following this light for the entire week they were roaming the outback. He said no matter how far they kept traveling, they didn't seem to get anywhere close to it. If they hadn't run into the farmer that found them, they would have never stopped following the light, and probably would have died. So my mother had gotten sick of me being scared all the time, and called her sister who lived in Adelaide to come visit. She's something along the lines of a psychic or medium. So she comes down, and the moment she pulls up, she tells us not to tell her anything about what we've seen, and that she's going to wander around the street for a while and come back and tell us what she saw. When she came back, she was visibly shaken. She told me that these things were unlike anything she'd ever experienced, and that she had also run into the spirit of an old aboriginal woman. The woman told her that her tribe was a split-off group from the Tharawal, and came to the area that would become the town I lived in to escape the Maiyal Mula. But the Maiyal Mula followed them. The woman then showed her horrific images of these things slaughtering Aboriginal children and eating them through a small slit in their mouth. The woman then told her she drowned herself in the creek, so she would act as a spiritual barrier to keep the Maiyal Mula out. She said this worked until a pyramid-shaped stone on a pathway was built facing the way the Maiyal Mula had come. This rune broke the barrier and acted as an entrance to allow them to come in once again. The Aboriginal woman led my aunt down the path to show her something even more terrifying. After eating the small children, they would rebirth these kids to be their minions. My aunt said the minions were completely physical and live out in the desert, and sometimes come into the town for food. These offspring are apparently harmless, and mainly just keep an eye on people for the Maiyal Mula. My auntie became confused, and said if they were killing children just to make them into spies, then what was their motive in the first place? It was explained to her that the Maiyal Mula just seemed intent on inflicting pain and suffering on people. She said they rape women and men alike, make women miscarriage, cause all sorts of accidents, and kill the weak. Despite this, they seem to have a personal vendetta against the Aboriginal woman's tribe, and seem intent on wiping them out. This is why they remain focused on the town. After hearing all of this, we put the house on the market, and began preparations to leave. A couple of days before we left, I went on one last motorbike ride to where my father had told me not to go. While riding along the dirt path, I saw this rock that was on the side. It was weird because it looked like it was smoothed down a bit and had some markings on it. Here's a picture with the writing marked up so you can see it better.